Welcome to the Paper Machete. I want to talk about media. Big news story this week. It was reported that the New York Times is going to start charging its readers for content, which is really a big surprise. And I suppose it was probably only a matter of time, but it's a huge gamble. And whether or not the American intellectual community wants to admit it, the entire community is watching the New York Times to figure out if money can be made from charging readers for internet journalism. Since the rise of the internet, the New York Times has essentially been giving the news away for free, which it was not built to do. And I wanted to tell you a story about one of my first experiences in journalism at a place that was built to give the news away for free. I was sitting in a groovy, weirdo little gay joint in Rogers Park having a drink by myself after a play I'd just seen next door, and a lady in a gray sweatshirt comes in, sits down next to me, and drops a copy of the Chicago Reader on the bar. The year was 2004, which means it landed with a thud. I tried to keep my voice tough and expressionless as I said, "I write for the Reader." And she gazed at me, kind of perplexed. So I gestured over modestly to the shambling hay bale of filthy newsprint that she had just schlepped in the door with her and said, "I write for the Chicago Reader." And she looked at the newspaper for a second, and as soon as she could put it together what I was talking about, she said, "Oh, I picked this up from my birdcage." And there you pretty much have it. The Chicago Reader was everywhere. It was stacked up in windows of bars and coffee shops where it basically barricaded the patrons from daylight. Bins where you could pick it up for free were everywhere. Chicago Reader bins were the Chicago private parking meters of the print media years, and you can figure out that analogy by yourself later and call me in the morning. A bunch of smart, hard-working people were necessary to create the Reader every week, and so that's what was allotted for. There was a bunch of editors on staff, just as paranoid and grizzled as you would want them to be, and scores of freelancers who were decently compensated for their work. The money came from the classifieds, and it was a brilliant setup. People who wanted to find roommates or lovers with really specific fetishes, or who wanted to sell their patio furniture, they could all advertise that situation in the same place for $25. Real bands were formed this way, real married couples. It was like the opposite of a megachurch. Nobody judged anybody. And you couldn't believe the volume of the thing. When I moved here 8 years ago, the Chicago Reader came out every Thursday in 4 massive sections, each one unique and important, a completely different animal from the other 3. 4 new sections every week. The Chicago Reader did every 2 weeks what the Octomon will only do once in her lifetime, because every section was a baby. And even though I only ever contributed as a cub freelancer to the theater coverage at the Reader, that still felt curiously important, because people go to the theater in Chicago. At least that's what a bunch of theater people told me at the time. Being relatively egalitarian and being the free press of record in a city with a big theater scene, the Reader listed all the plays in town alphabetically and reviewed them all pretty much the same. Which means if you were producing some rancid urinal cake of a one-man show about salty cab drivers in a broom closet in Rogers Park, and that one-man show was alphabetically next to the newest Victory Gardens play about church in the South, that meant that you were getting pissed on right alongside a regional Tony winner and with the same word count. It was all very libertarian and kind of mod. They took the theater very seriously. I remember an editor I worked with, Martha. She was the toughest. First time she ever edited me, I'd written a feature story about a drummer and composer who was doing a new show with the then newly anointed House Theater Company of Chicago. And she called me up and said, "It's a nice story, but can we not end with a quote about how much fun they have working together and about how it's sweet and they love each other?" Martha was tough. She was one of those people who, even though she had to spend untold hours burrowed in the Reader offices to make the paper come out every week, still always seemed to be running around the city and just sort of stumbling onto things just when they happen, which is, I guess, one of the ways a person accidentally becomes a journalist. And her metabolism was intimidating. You sent her for a pitch for a story that was dumb. She didn't just ignore it and delete it. She wrote you back to explain that it was dumb and specifically how. Sometimes she would go through your dumb pitch email sentence by sentence in screaming all capital letters to best illustrate what it was she was looking for that you were not providing. And I remember some other writer buddies of mine at the time knew Martha too. She was hard to impress. And I remember one night at about 3 a.m. after a Christmas party in my apartment, sitting in a diner with two of them, all of us basically unpublished Chicago writers, vowing that we really didn't care what Martha thought of us, and then proceeding to talk about her for the next hour. But she wasn't mean. She was thorough. And she meant business. And her business was ass-kicking citizens journalism, and she expected the same of everybody she edited.